Good evening, I'm Amrul Aiman. Here are the top stories for tonight. The UN Security Council, backed by the United States, condemns strikes on Qatar. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approves a West Bank settlement expansion plan and rules out the prospect of a Palestinian state. That and more coming up on Awan International. The United Nations Security Council has condemned the latest strike on Doha, Qatar. All 15 members backed the statement, including the United States, Israel's closest ally. But the statement stopped short of naming Israel directly as the aggressor. Washington, which typically shields Israel at the UN, broke with tradition by supporting the statement, which was drafted by Britain and France. It called for de-escalation, voiced solidarity with Qatar, and reaffirmed the country's sovereignty. Officials described Israel's strike targeting Hamas political leaders in Doha as unilateral and counterproductive, saying it served neither American nor Israeli interests. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, defended the attack. He said there would be no safe haven for what he called terrorists, not in Gaza, not in Tehran, and not in Doha. And in a televised address, a senior Hamas official restated the group's demands for a full ceasefire, Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, a prisoner for hostage exchange, and humanitarian aid to rebuild. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has signed off on a controversial West Bank settlement project on land Palestinian Sea as part of a future state. Critics say the move could effectively rule out a Palestinian state, separating the West Bank from East Jerusalem, a key component of the two-state solution. The project, known as E1, was approved last month by Israel's far-right government. Netanyahu vowed that there would be no Palestinian state while cementing the settlement's expansion. The plan had been stalled for years due to strong opposition from the international community, including Europe and the United States. Israeli settlements in the West Bank, occupied since 1967, are considered illegal under international law. Any new development is seen as a major obstacle to peace. Stay tuned for more after the break.
Satu dekad, 3 filem blockbuster yang sensasi. Stream kesemuanya. Sempena ulang tahun Polis Evo ke-10. The Astro.
Welcome back. China is hitting back at Mexico's decision to raise tariffs on Asian-made cars, calling it a blow to investor confidence and a threat to Mexico's business climate. Beijing's Commerce Ministry says it doesn't want relations to suffer, but warned it will take necessary measures to defend its interests. The new tariffs announced this week lift duties on Chinese cars to as much as 50%, the maximum allowed under global trade rules. President Claudia Sheinbaum says Mexico is not looking for a fight. In fact, she calls the move strategic, designed to boost local production and support the economy. But analysts say there's more to it, pointing to US pressure on Latin American governments to scale back economic ties with Beijing. Still, Mexico's Automotive Association is backing the higher tariffs, saying they level the playing field and protect jobs. China is Mexico's biggest supplier of imported vehicles. Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been sentenced to 27 years and 3 months in prison after being convicted of plotting a coup to stay in power following his 2022 electoral defeat. The court also convicted 7 of his allies, including military officers, marking Brazil's first conviction of an ex-leader for attacking democracy.
The case stems from the January 8, 2023 riots when Bolsonaro supporters stormed Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace, just days after current President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva took office. Prosecutors said Bolsonaro helped spread false claims of fraud and pressured the military to overturn the result. 4 of the 5 justices found him guilty of attempting to abolish democracy by force, participating in a criminal organization, and damaging government property. Bolsonaro is currently under house arrest and barred from office until 2030. The ruling marks the first time in Brazil's modern history that a former president has been convicted for plotting against democratic institutions.
Hundreds of South Korean workers arrested during a U.S. immigration raid last week have returned home, landing at Incheon Airport earlier today. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun says Seoul and Washington are now looking to establish a working group to consider a new visa category for South Koreans. The immigration raid at Hyundai Motor and LG Energy Solution battery plant in the state of Georgia had led to the detention of 475 people, of which 300 were South Korean. After being held for a week by U.S. Immigration Customs and Enforcement, they were released and flown from Atlanta. According to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the workers had been employed using wrong visas. Hyundai CEO meanwhile warned the battery plant will face a startup delay of at least 2 to 3 months as a result. The incident has also strained ties between South Korea and the US, longtime allies working to finalize a trade deal. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will hold trade talks with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and other senior officials in Madrid next week. The agenda is expected to include the status of Chinese-owned social media platform TikTok, as well as joint efforts to combat money laundering.
The meetings are part of Bessent's trips to Spain and Britain from September 12 to 18th. It will be the 4th round of face-to-face discussions between the 2 top economic officials this year, aimed at upholding a trade truce. The agreement has so far involved lower retaliatory tariffs and the resumption of Chinese rare earth exports to the U.S. In late July, both sides extended their tariff pause for 90 days, set to expire on November 10th. TikTok, however, was not raised during the July talks. President Donald Trump, whose White House launched its own account on the platform last month, has extended a deadline for TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, to divest its U.S. assets until September 17th or face a potential ban.
The UK government has implemented 100 new sanctions targeting Russia's revenues and military supplies. The move comes as its Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper travels to Kyiv in a show of solidarity with Ukraine in its war with Russia. The new sanctions will hit 70 more ships, which the UK said were being used to transport Russian oil, along with 30 companies and individuals accused of supplying the Russian military with components for weapons systems. Among them are an electronic firms based in China and another in Turkey. The package was announced in response to Russia's largest air assault on Ukraine, as well as its recent violation of NATO airspace over Poland in the past week. Cooper said international action to cut off Russia's cash flows is crucial, adding that the sanctions represent the next phase in the UK's efforts to combine economic pressure with security support for Ukraine. This week on Wu Says, we look into the second part of the mini-series on the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s. The second episode explores how Malaysia navigated the crisis, the costs and benefits of its bold choices, and the lasting effects on the economy. Here's a segment from a conversation with Professor Emeritus Datuk Dr. Wu Bing Tai.
It is important to note that in this time, there was a lot of chaos outside Malaysia. And this chaos, in turn, undermined investors' confidence. And basically, they say, hold on, I'm not going to expand operation. In fact, I'm going to scale back and see what happens. Now, in the case of Malaysia, the banks basically stopped working because the banks were bankrupt. So they were not lending out money. So that was great difficulties. What usually happens in a democracy when an economic disaster happens, the usual procedure, the usual ritual that appears is whoever was in charge take responsibility for it. He leaves office and somebody takes over. That somebody may do exactly the same thing, but confidence has been revived. And when confidence is revived, business goes back to usual. You could say in the case of Thailand, right after the exchange rate debacle in July 1997, Prime Minister Chavalit was replaced by Chungpa within 4 months. In the case of Korea, when the exchange rate plummeted in November 1997, in the presidential election that was held a month later, the opposition won for the first time. Kim Dae-jung, the perpetual presidential candidate, he has run 3 times before and he's lost each time. He won. Basically, economic crisis delegitimized the incumbent, and there is a change in government, and that business goes back to usual. Now, this happened in Thailand after the middle of 1997, in Korea at the end of 1997, and in the case of Indonesia, when the rupiah had gone from 2,500 to 10,000, Suharto was re-elected to be president for the 7th term. So there was immediate riots in the streets of Jakarta because the elections were seen as unfair. And what happened to the rupiah? The rupiah went from 10,000 rupiah to US dollar to 15,000 rupiah dollars. So Mahathir could see that the economic crisis is going to give rise to lots of economic unhappiness and hence potential political instability. And he realized that if people were to start running out of the ringgit even more, both the stock market in Malaysia will crash as well as the ringgit, because people will be withdrawing money from the stock market and sending it out of the country. When you withdraw money from the stock market crash. When you send it out the money, the ringgit crash. So to prevent this crash, Mahathir imposed the capital controls on September 1st, 1998. And then after imposing those controls, he went about restructuring and reorganizing the banks in order for them to start lending money normally again to revive the economy.
Catch the full conversation on Awani International and across our social media platforms.
So when they saw the Thai
That's Awani International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the rivalries, strategies, and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more, head to international.israawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Amirul Aiman. Thank you for watching and good night.
Bully di